subtle things that will make you a much, much better pitcher. Not with a baseball, with a bait and a rod and reel. I'm no good at doing this number, okay? This is not that kind of pitching. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and we are going through some casting styles and different ways to present your bait, and hopefully you've caught a lot of these videos so far and really wanting to help you understand some of the subtleties that go into every single type of cast, as well as ways to make them, in my opinion, I don't want to say the best ways, the way that I do it, okay? I don't want to say that anybody else's technique is wrong or anything. These are just the ways that I have learned over years and years and making a couple casts throughout my lifetime. So today's cast is the pitch. So that's something, I know growing up in my era, they kind of went together, flipping and pitching. We're going to do this in two separate videos because largely I feel like the application for them is different, as well as the technique in and of itself is definitely different. But with pitching, there's something like somebody would just say, well, you just bring the rod back and swing the bait out there and that's the pitch. There's some truth to that, but man, there are some subtle things that will make you a much, much better pitcher, not with a baseball, with a bait and a rod and reel. I'm no good at doing this number, okay? This is not that kind of pitching. But there are some subtle differences that will make you a much, much better pitcher with a rod and reel than making these few mistakes. So first one of the biggest keys in my opinion with pitching is having the right amount of line between your rod tip and your bait. Okay, so having that bait at about the halfway point. This is a 7-foot rod. It does not matter on the length, okay? I like a 7 to a 7.6 is what I do most of my pitching with, but where your bait is irrelevant to the length of the rod. I would have about the same amount of line if I was using a 6-foot rod or if I was using an 8-foot rod. I would have the bait in the same place. So I guess it's technically a different amount of line out, but I'm gonna have the bait landing in the same place. And that is about the midpoint between the first guide and the reel. Slightly closer to the reel is okay, probably better than slightly closer to the guide, but somewhere in that midpoint is where you want that bait to start with, okay? If you're up here, you're gonna have a problem, and I'll show you that in a second. If you're back here at your reel or beyond, you're gonna have problems, and I'll show you why that is in a second. Being at that kind of sweet spot right in there, one, standing on the deck of the boat, your line is gonna be a little bit further away from the water. Again, if I'm doing this with a 6-foot rod, it's less amount of line from my tip to my bait, so it's all relative still. If it's with an 8-foot rod, it's more, but I've got a lot more rod to work with. So when you take that bait, and if you're really trying to get good distance or great control, holding it in your hand is a great way to start. Make sure you're not gonna hold it where you're gonna get hooked. So either hold it by the head of the bait, hold it back here kind of on the meat of the trailer, or the back of the bend of the hook. Don't hold it right here. That doesn't sound very smart. It's gonna be a good way to get a hook in your thumb. So hold it back there where you're not gonna have to worry about getting hooked. Take that, take the bait in your offhand. I typically do most all my pitching with my left hand. This is one where I have a pretty significant difference hand to hand, I feel like, is with the pitch. Take the bait in your offhand, put a little bit of tension actually on the rod tip, just a little bit is okay. You don't want it bent way down or anything, but just a little bit of tension where you're holding that tight. And then you're gonna point the rod tip down, and as you swing it up, that's when you're gonna let go of that bait. So that swing up, and then pushing that rod out away from you a little bit is gonna really help. Okay, so again, just kind of demonstrating that. Bait in the right hand, rod in the left, and that nice smooth swing. And timing of the release of that bait is really key. So, letting it go there. Now, if I'm in a rhythm, I'm not going to touch the bait. I'm just going to reel it up, and then I'm going to make that next pitch with it. Another big thing, what you're doing with your rod and reel hand, if I'm not trying to make a extremely long distance pitch, I don't have to go very far with that hand. I can keep it here pretty close to my body. But if I'm really wanting to get it out there, the better way to do that isn't to just whip it real hard and keep it here close. It's to actually push that rod out away from the body, you know, when I'm making that pitch. So really kind of exaggerating that and pushing that rod out away from you, I'm able to get a lot more distance with that pitch than I can if I just keep it right here really close. So kind of that kind of number where I'm pushing the rod out as the bait, you know, as the bait goes away, definitely helps with that. Okay, so on the amount of line, so let's back up to that just a little bit. If I'm up here, if I'm at my first guide, it just feels really awkward for one trying to hold the bait. But even if I just reel it up and I'm there, it's always going to want that bait to kind of hop more. It's not going to have that nice low swing, you know, just above the water's line. So right up there's, you know, just a little bit above that first guide. I can't get quite the momentum here swinging it. I don't get the pendulum effect that I like to have to where I can really get a good pitch on it, and it always goes high. It's always going to make a bigger splash. It's always going to land higher that way. Now, if I've got too much line out, I've got it down here at the end of the rod, I've got so much line that it's hard to keep it off of the water. I'm gonna hit the water very early in my cast, really have to raise my rod tip up super high to get any swing on it, you know, once I get down below the reel. So down in that range right there, or if I have it in my hand, the bait just wants to go low so fast. So that's why having it above the reel, somewhere between the reel and that first guide, halfway in between or so, that is absolutely the sweet spot. I've got the most power while also not having it too high above the water where it's hopping, or so low that it's hitting the water right here close to the boat. It's definitely the sweet spot with that pitch. Let's see, what else? Like I said, most of my pitching is probably done on a 7/6 heavy action rod, you know, because a lot of this may be in grass, in heavier cover, around boat docks, those type of things. But I definitely do it some, you know, just on rock banks or, you know, light bushes, light laydowns, that kind of stuff with a 7-foot medium heavy or heavy. That's what I'll catch so many fish throughout the year on a Bass Pro Magnum Finesse worm on that Platinum rod, 7-1 medium heavy. This is actually a prototype in that Platinum series, is what this one is. It'll be coming out pretty soon. But that Platinum rod, 7-1 medium heavy, is a rod I catch tons and tons of bass pitching with throughout the course of the year. I think like the Lake Champlain tournament, I caught a lot of really good fish pitching that worm around on isolated logs and stuff. So it's a great way to make very, very accurate presentations out to, you know, 10 or 15 yards is kind of the length of those casts most of the time. Is a 10 or 15 yard cast is where I seem to, or pitch is where I end up with that for the most part. One big thing you always want to do, because I'm going to pitch, you know, I'm going to pitch that bait in there at that tree or lay down. I'm going to fish it. I'm going to fish it back a little bit. But most of my pitches, I'm fishing a 5-foot section or a 10-foot section, maybe. You know, I'm fishing that piece of cover, that target, boom, right there. Then I'm gonna reel it back in, and I'm gonna make the next pitch. A high-speed reel helps you make way more casts throughout the course of a day than a slower speed reel, just because you get the bait in that much faster, you make the next presentation. So this is a time when a high-speed reel is most definitely your best friend. I use the Bass Pro Platinum 8-3-1 reel with this, and I actually do a lot of my pitching as well as flipping anymore with braid with a fluorocarbon leader. I just love I love the feel of it. I love the sensitivity, and I love the way that it is when you set the hook without having much stretch, except just in that little bit of leader. So this one I've got just straight fluorocarbon, 20-pound XPS fluorocarbon on, but just keep that in mind. This is something I do a lot with braid and a leader anymore. So hope those tips help you on pitching and the kind of application with that, make you a better angler out there on the water.